Hello and welcome to this morning's Talk at 10. Just as many parents and carers that are homeschooling will, I'm sure, be relieved to have hit half-term week, some businesses, of course, are planning their reopening from next week. From the 1st of June, non-essential retail will be permitted to open, and cultural and sporting events will also be allowed to take place behind closed doors for broadcast, subject to those businesses being able to follow the new COVID-19 secure guidelines. This week, we look at the HR implications of staff returning to work, as well as for those remaining on furlough. We also explore how managers and business owners can restructure sensitively and build resilience within teams. This morning, I'll be in conversation with two experts in the field, Lance Hobbs, Director of HR Department, Ealing and Park Royal, as well as Owen Morgan, UK Managing Director at Into. Throughout the programme, my colleague Pim will be monitoring your questions, so please keep them coming in. Now, as always, I must remind you at this point in the programme to not forget our West London Business Support Helpline, which remains available 9 to 5 on 020 8607 2500, ready to take your calls, and also the supporting website, coronavirus.westlondon.com. So do take a look if you haven't already. I should also thank Better Futures, who support our Talk at 10 webcasts. Better Futures is, of course, the Mayor of London's flagship programme to create a clean tech cluster in our capital. If you're wondering how to apply for Better Futures, in order to be eligible, you must be an SME. That means having up to 249 employees or a turnover under 500 million euros per annum, very precise. You should have a London address, have or be about to develop a clean technology. That's any product that has a good impact on the environment. The balance sheet, as I said, but should be below 43 million, and the business can't be a subsidiary or under the control of one or several other enterprises. In order to apply, please email tnshealy, PhD at West London Business with a brief intro on your project. So, let's get down to business. On the programme today, we're going to be exploring a number of themes. First of all, returning to work, and then issues for those remaining on furlough and their employers. We'll be talking about building resilience, as well as restructuring sensitively, and finally looking ahead to how we prepare our workforce for the long term. So a very warm welcome to my panel, Lance and Owen. Great to have you on the programme with us this morning. I wonder whether you can give us a flavour, perhaps, of your service offers at HR Department and Into, respectively. But also, I'd be fascinated to hear a little bit about how you found your way into these careers at HR Department and Into. So Lance, over to you to share a little bit about the HR Department and your own story.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good morning to everybody. Yes, HR Department is a outsourced HR service, so we become your HR department. You can sign up with us for a year, and it's a retained service, and we'll give you advice and guidance and support as an HR department would if they were internal to you. We also have pay-as-you-go services as well, so if you don't feel like signing up for the year, of course, you can come to us for individual services. And we also add providing things like HR systems, benefits, payroll, pension as well. So we, as I say, we are your HR department, and we provide all services, anything from recruitment through exiting the business, which isn't always a negative, I have to add, and everything in between. I fell into HR by accident. Sorry.
I was just going to prompt you, Lance. Tell us your story as to how you did fall into HR by accident. I'm fascinated.
Yeah, so I left school at 17. For those people who are old enough to remember O levels, I had a few, and wasn't sure what to do with my life. And I went for a job at the Home Office and decided it was time for me to think about a career, even that early on. And so I went to the Home Office, and in those days, when you went to the civil service, they put you in a department based on where there was availability. And I just happened to enter our department. And that's where it took off from, really. So that was over 30 years ago. So 30 years a CIPD member, and got my certificate proudly. That's my story.
No, fascinating, and clearly you've enjoyed the field, or you hopefully wouldn't have stuck at it for so long.
Well, I mean, there are certainly some very difficult things you have to deal with, but there's also a lot of positive in the HR field. So, yeah, like you say, I wouldn't have done it for over 30 years if I didn't enjoy it overall.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lance. Owen, tell us a bit about Into and how you found your way into this space.
How I found my way into the space. So again, thanks, Andrew, and welcome everyone. So Into is an HR services business. We provide 5 core activities: executive coaching, mentoring, career development, outplacement, which is the support given to people who are let go from businesses, and restructuring and change management activity. So I guess we complement some of the things that Lance's business would undertake. How did I find myself in the HR services business? When I left university at 21, I, probably like a lot of people, fell into a graduate role. I was there for 10 years and I worked in the oil industry, thoroughly enjoyed it. But after 10 years, the industry went through a series of mergers and I opted for voluntary redundancy. At that point, I was offered outplacement, didn't know anything about it. And as a relatively confident 31-year-old, thought, no, I don't need to take that up. I'll go and find another role. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I found myself in a role that was completely unsuited to me. Resigned after around 4 or 5 weeks, went back to my former employer and asked if I could have or take advantage of the outplacement service I'd been offered. They agreed kindly. I took the offer of the outplacement service up, had a great time, and it really was the first time that I aligned my skills and my ideas around what I wanted to do with my career with, different roles. So I made the sort of the pivot, which I think is the word of the day, into HR. And I guess career coaching, outplacement, executive coaching, people development have been a passion of mine ever since. So, I'm an ICF accredited coach. I thoroughly believe that careers and career development should be taught at schools these days. I think it's so important, given the changing nature of the workplace that we're all finding ourselves in. So, yeah, I'm an evangelical supporter of career development. I think it's very important and something that more people should take advantage of.
Brilliant, and I'm sure we'll come back perhaps later in the programme to the sort of scope of outplacement. But in summary, I suppose it's offering people that chance to pause and think at sort of critical life moments, which we offer probably in our busy lives, certainly pre-COVID. So some of us still during COVID-19, that chance to pause, I think we really need to look for. Now, I'm sure, like all of our guests over the past few weeks, you all both have been talking to many different businesses and stakeholders. I wonder whether you can give us a sense of what you're hearing right now, and how the situation has changed perhaps since lockdown began now over 8 weeks ago. Lance, what are you hearing on the street?
Yeah, it's an interesting that even prior to lockdown, one of the businesses that I look after was reliant on people coming from overseas, so their income dropped off a cliff even prior to lockdown. So they struggled financially. Before the furlough scheme was announced, they were wondering what to do with their staff. But as the furlough scheme was announced, most of the businesses that I deal with, and I stress most, not all, have been struggling to wonder what to do with their people, and a majority have probably furloughed all of their people. And as we get towards this stage, the next stage of they want what to do next and how to bring people back, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. So there are some businesses that actually are doing better as a result. And I don't want to sound morbid about it, but a funeral directors is a client of mine, and their business has gone up, for example. So it is a mixed bag about what's happening out there. But I think in the middle sphere, the businesses have either furloughed some or all of their staff, and are now looking to wonder how to reopen up, getting that vital income back into their businesses.
And as you say, we are in that sort of midpoint of the furlough journey, and of course getting closer to a date where employers are going to have to make a contribution as well, which is, I think, focusing minds for many. Owen, what are you hearing out there?
Several different themes. So if I start at the people side, yes, lots of organisations furloughing staff. I do think that when the government money starts to run out, many organisations will take a look at very battered balance sheets and struggling P&L accounts, and I think there'll be an uptick in redundancies. We're already hearing that. We've been contacted by a number of organisations, existing clients and prospects, who are asking us about outplacement support when the government money starts to ebb away. So I think we'll probably see a peak towards the start of July or end of June, when the 80% provision comes to an end, and thereafter September, October, when the scheme at this stage looks as if it's running out. So that's the negative side. I guess on a more positive note, I think the COVID-19 issue and the fact that people are working from home has really accelerated flexible working. So everyone now is much more familiar with technology, this type of technology, webinar technology. We're seeing lots of investment in organizations who are relatively small businesses, but are able to add value to organizations that support home working. I think a number of organizations had always been a little bit fearful of not having their staff in an office where they could keep an eye on them. But actually, things have been very positive, and people have generally stepped up to the plate and undertaken some good quality work. I always think that people who work from home generally tend to work harder. They sort of don't have to do the 90 minutes or 60-minute journey into work, and I think as a result of that, they do tend to put more hours in. So I think we've seen a real sort of leap forward in terms of how people work and how they're expected to work and what their relationship with work is. So there are some real positives out of this, and I think had we not had this situation, it would have taken us another 4 or 5 years to get to the point that we're at now.
Yeah, no, we've reflected a few times over the past few weeks how it feels like we've fast forwarded to 2025 in just 2 months. Now I'm going to take us on to our sort of first theme of the morning, and that's returning to work and the sort of related challenges. And I'd like to bring Lance in, so perhaps share with us what sort of steps businesses and managers whose staff have been on furlough but will now be returning to work might need to take. Lance?
Yeah, the first point is really about communicating to your staff. I think that you can't overemphasize the fact that communication is so important when people aren't actually in the normal workplace but are working from home or furloughed, as you say. So the first thing to do is make sure that you communicate, give as much notice as possible of any changes to the current situation to your people. I'll caveat this next bit with I'm not a health and safety expert. We do have a health and safety system company that can help with these things. But certainly organisations need to complete a risk assessment if they're going to be able to work. So what are the risks associated with bringing people back, given the current guidelines that the government has put in place? Then they've got to check to make sure that they've got the hygiene processes in place. So have they got everything that's needed in terms of hand sanitizers, etc., PPE even if necessary. And some organisations may even be putting up perspex between desks and things like that. I'll also need to stress that if people can still work from home, then they should be able to work from home even in the current situation. So make sure they can do that. Everything you can to maintain social distancing in the workplace. So things like having desks back to back, for example, is one way that you could do it. But also have one-way systems for moving through the offices or the premises that you're in. And also, if you can't manage social distancing very well, you need people back to work, then managing the transition, PPE, gloves, masks, etc., is certainly one way to do it. Staggering people's shift patterns if you can, which is why you need to give people notice if you want to bring them back to work. So those are the sorts of things that businesses should be looking to do, and certainly following government guidelines.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think we're just going to bring up on screen a slide as a reminder of that sort of pathway that we're now on. Sort of step one, of course, is now passed, as you reinforced, Lance. Important that those that can continue to work from home do so. It's those workers that can't work from home that should now be travelling to work if their workplace is open. We're now just about to hit that 1st of June milestone where we've been sort of hoping that non-essential retail might start to sort of open its doors, and we'll start to see behind closed doors cultural and sports events, which I'm sure for football, rugby, cricket fans will be a great relief. And then step 3, no earlier than the 4th of July, that sort of wider sort of reopening of premises, very much hoped for. Now, just another question, Lance, before I come to Owen. For those employers that are that are faced with that sort of transition back for a lot of their workforce, there could be a lot of anxiety out there, I imagine. Any tips for kind of reassuring staff, particularly perhaps those that are having to use public transport?
Yeah, so there may well be a lot of anxiety for people coming back to work. The employer's duty is to make sure that they manage the workplace effectively. So they have a duty of care to their people. So they should do everything they can in the workplace. And part of that is, at the beginning, communication about what you're doing is so important that people understand that when they come to work, that they are going to be safe at work, or as safe as possible. Public transport is a difficult issue for employers, because if that's the only way somebody can get to work, the employer can't do much that happens on public transport. So it's a difficult one. What I would say for an employer is try and be sympathetic to individuals that are feeling that way. If ultimately I say to somebody, if you have to come back to work, public transport is the only way to do it. There should still be safe distancing on public transport, but it's when they get to work that the employer's duty of care starts. You could go down the route, if you're so inclined, to take action with people that don't return to work when you're asking them to. But in the current situation, I would ask employers to be a bit sympathetic about it, explore the worries with people, and see if you can find alternative ways to get them to work.
Thank you. Some sound advice there, Lance. Owen, you were reflecting on the sort of cultural shift that we've witnessed to much more home working, really, sort of across the board, and the technology that's now been put in place. How does that work, do you think, in reverse, as we sort of transition sort of potentially back to the office? I'd imagine maybe more staff wanting to work remotely indefinitely. What are your thoughts on that challenge?
I think the latter point is absolutely true. I think there's been several surveys recently that have highlighted the fact that those individuals who are working from home and potentially newly working from home really do want to see that figure as part and parcel of their work-life package moving forward. I think I saw one survey that said 87% of individuals who are newly working from home, would like to see an element of that continue, even if the workplace is fully reopened. So I think we can probably expect to see that. And there are clearly some practical issues that Lance has touched upon. When I look at my situation, I work in Holborn. I live outside of London, but I work in Holborn. I work in an office that's 6 stories high. There's probably around between 80 and 100 people in each floor of that office. We have 4 lifts, so already they're talking about 2 up, 2 down. The surface area of the floor area of a lift is probably around 1.8 square meters. So that means 1 person in and 1 person up and down at any one time. So there are some real challenges there, just in terms of moving people around a relatively small office block in London. So I think what organisations will have to do is stagger how they reintroduce people into the workplace. Going back to my former point, actually that could work well. So, already I've said to my team, look, I'm not expecting everyone to be back in at the same time. We'll have some sort of rota. We may decide to move fully to Fridays where everyone is working from home. And we'll stagger the introduction of how people need to be in the office. Clearly, we're needing to reconfigure desks. I sit at a desk which is a block of 6. I can't have someone in front of me. I can't have someone to the left of me. So our block of 6 desks now really can only accommodate 3 workers. And I suspect that many, many organizations will face similar challenges. So I think there will be some challenges. I think that we are still waiting for some innovative ideas to come through. Yes, PPE, ensuring there's an adequate supply of disinfectant and hand sanitizer around the place will be absolutely key. Whether that will be enough and whether people will want to risk that as being enough, time will tell. I think there will definitely be some support required to individuals with regards to resilience, and I know we'll talk about that in a few minutes, because people will be concerned. I walk my dog on the canal behind our house, and people are very, very conscious about maintaining that sort of social distance. So that's in a relatively sort of rural setting in the countryside. What that will look like.
Oh, we've briefly lost Owen there. Let's hope the link springs back to life. We lost you momentarily there, Owen. Hopefully you can hear us again. Okay. I was just going to reflect that at West London Business we've been contemplating the need to have team meetings in parks, because only in a park will we find enough space to sit 2 meters apart.
Absolutely.
So a whole new world, but hopefully a world with some new pleasures ahead of us. Now I'm going to take us on to our next theme of the day, which is the question of what's happening for those that aren't returning to work, that perhaps still in furlough for an extended period of time. And I'd be interested to hear, Lance, what you're hearing of the different ways in which people are reacting to finding themselves on furlough. I mean, I imagine that some might be loving it, but others could be loathing furlough.
Yes, exactly right, Andrew. There is various responses to furlough. Of course, first thing is some people have asked to be furloughed, which is not part of your employer has to ask you to be furloughed, because if you're going to go on furlough, it means there is no work for you to do. So some people actually asked for it. They were looking forward to being off with 80% pay. Others just accepted it because they understand that the furlough scheme has actually been put in place to safeguard jobs. It's a job retention scheme. So there are people that understand that there is a need to do it. There have been a minority, really, that have said, I don't want to be furloughed, I want to keep working. It is unusual at the moment, because people do understand that there is a need to furlough, then people need to be off. The biggest concern, really, is for the low-paid people to get 80% of your pay, and for it to be low pay, people who are living week to week and don't have much of a buffer within their budget financially for home. those are the ones that are probably going to be suffering the most. And it's those people that will want to get back to work much quicker so they can get back up to the 100%. Of course, there are some organisations that have topped up, and it's the full 20% top up or just partially. So I've a couple of businesses I know have topped up to 90% because they've been able to do so. And that's a fortunate position to be in. But generally speaking, I think it's been accepted that in the current circumstances, furlough, the fact that the government put in a furlough scheme was very useful, rather than people having to be laid off or even made redundant at that point in time.
And of course, I'm sure some staff will be sort of sitting at home on furlough, worried about whether furloughing is a step towards redundancy. What are your thoughts on what managers should say to staff that are raising those very difficult concerns? Lance, that was to Lance.
I think there's
sorry.
two parts to this. Yeah. So I think there's two parts to that, really. One is if everybody is furloughed, yes, there may be the opportunity for business to say we have to consultation redundancy. And I think people are really to understand that if there's no revenue coming in, a business might find it difficult to survive without making some cuts. I think the biggest worry is where you have a business that has furloughed some staff but not everybody. And again, it will depend on the reasons for that. But when we've talked to businesses about furloughing some staff and not everybody, we've asked them to use a similar process as they would in a redundancy situation. So if redundancies are going to be thought about, consultation needs to start. It might well be that those are furloughed, may well be the vulnerable, but you still have to follow a correct legal process rather than just make all those who have been furloughed redundant.
And any thoughts, Lance, on how you keep furloughed staff engaged and kind of feeling supported? I mean, can they be doing training, for example, whilst they're on furlough?
Yeah, I mean, regular communication with them, just telling them what within the business. Again, it comes communicating. The best businesses, the ones that keep their employees engaged, communicate well with them, tell them what's going on. But also I've heard some situations where businesses, obviously you can't work while you're furloughed. You can't even send emails just to reply to emails and things like that, because that's providing a service to the organisation, which you can't do. But there could be some social aspects you can have. There's lots of video conferencing. Owen mentioned it earlier. Video conferencing is a big thing now. So you could do quizzes for furloughed staff, or just a social chat, people having parties on Zoom. Find ways to engage with them, talk to them, understand what the things are that are going on with them, whether they've got any real concerns, and you can address those concerns before they come back to work if you understand what they are early.
I've been discovering with our team quizzes at West London Business that my general knowledge isn't up to scratch. Certainly not for the quizzes that the team are posing. Now, moving on to our third theme of the morning of building resilience. Owen, I wonder whether you can share some of your thoughts around uncertainty and change, and how those huge stress points, I think, for many can impact on performance.
Yeah, sure, and certainly they are stress points for some people. Most people by nature aren't resistant to change. They accept it as something that, certainly in the current environment is something that's regular and ongoing. However, I think if it's handled badly or if it's not communicated well, that's where the stress points start to arrive. So I remember Jack Welch, the guy from GE, once said, make sure you're ready for change because it's around the corner. And I think that's absolutely right. So helping people develop that sense of resilience, helping them get to a stage where they understand what is coming, how they can adapt to it, and how they can thrive off the back of it, I think is key. So again, we go back to, helping people understand their skills, making sure that people are continually developed, making sure they have a breadth of understanding. There's a phrase I use frequently called T-shaped people. So if you imagine a T, the letter T, a lot of people have very deep functional skills. So they have a very long bar of the T, What we are seeing now is that increasingly organisations have fewer people in them, so therefore they need individuals to develop a breadth of support. So the horizontal bar across the top as opposed to the vertical one. And I think once people get to the stage where they do have a variety of skills under their belts, they naturally find themselves more resilient anyway. There are always some individuals who are focused on issues and topics outside of their control. So we ask organizations and employers, some of the work we do is helping individuals very much focus on looking at the things that you can control and control them. Don't worry about the things that you can't control, because you can't control them. So it's worry for nothing. There are things you can influence. So, you may be able to influence the course of an organization's decisions if you have a managerial position. But make sure you're focusing on the right things. Try and keep a positive attitude. I know it's an easy thing to say, but you can actually develop some of these skills. So again, making sure the organisation is communicating effectively. You're involving staff members in some of the decisions, because they will have good ideas. They will have a contribution to make that can positively affect the momentum of the organisation.
And are there particular steps, Owen, that you could be taking as a manager to help kind of develop out that T? What sort of interventions might you put into place?
Sure. Well, I think when you look at the moment, there's a lot of change going on. I mean, that's clearly a given. People's roles will be changing as a result of that, whether they like it or not. So now is actually a really good time to look at the employees you have in your organisation, the skills they have, the gaps that you think they might need to fill over the course of the next 12, 18 months, and put in some provision to try and support them immediately. That requires a degree of mindset change. Some people will always turn up to work and say, well, I'm an accounts administrator, that's what I do. But actually, when you look at the skills that are deployed in that type of role, they can easily be disassembled and reassembled to provide that person, with different skills in a different type of environment. So, give people the option to experience different types of roles across the organization, because the better you can help them develop their capabilities, the more likely you are to see them engage in the role, but also get to a stage where they become more resilient and they future-proof their careers. So having managers coach individuals is important. Giving managers the skills to have effective career conversations. It's not the cursory, how's your year been? It's genuine interest in people that allows the manager and the employee to forge a relationship that benefits both those two and also the organization's future requirements.
It's really, really useful food for thought there. Now, last week we marked Mental Health Awareness Week on the programme, and of course, health and well-being of our people is an integral part of building resilience. I wonder whether you have any thoughts, Lance, on the manager's role in looking after the health and well-being of their people, and some practical steps to take.
Yeah, well, I think Owen's already alluded to it, really. So the things that a manager can do is make sure that they're building their own resilience, first of all, in order that they can support their people. As you say, that they have a duty of care to look after their people, and that managers understand if there are changes in an individual that they're seeing. It's not always easy to pick it up. People tend to hide if they're worrying about stuff. But a manager can spot things just by having conversations with people on a regular basis. They can detect those subtle changes in people that might be something that's heading down a direction to go, and talk about potential interventions. If a business has an intervention policy, something like an EAP, an employee assistance provision, for example, then they can point them in that direction. If somebody feels a bit reluctant to talk to their boss at work about things that are going on, they can talk to somebody privately about it as well. So there's two streams there, that they can go to their employer or somebody independent and talk to them about what might be going on. So the manager's support continues to do anyway.
Yeah, some really good practical points there, Lance. I'm going to bring my colleague Pim in, who always has an eye on her inbox for viewers' questions. Pim, do you have a question for Lance or Owen?
Well, a couple of questions come in. So firstly, for Lance maybe, what happens if, in order to return to work, a member of staff has to leave their child at home unattended? What should the manager's response be in that case?
And who's that for?
That's for you, Lance.
Is that for me?
It is, yes.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so then having the conversation with the employee, first of all, it depends on the age of the child, I suppose, because, of course, you can't leave a young child unattended at home. So it's about having a conversation with the employer, and to understand exactly what's going on. If there is a way that person, again, I'll come back to working from home if you can. If you can't, then the government has said that people should not be penalised, that they should be furloughed. So they can remain on furlough, but as we know, that as the scheme starts to get through to August time, then the organisation may have to put that furlough cost towards it. But dialogue, be sensible, be sensitive about it, and understand the situation.
Thank you, Lance. Do you have a second question, Pim?
Question for Owen. What will social distancing measures do to employee satisfaction, and what measures can be put in place to deal with this?
That's a good question. I think that largely depends on the response of the employing organisation. So, I look at my team. My team's a relatively young team, apart from me. They go to work, yes, because they're interested in the work, but there's also a social element to it. And I know that if I said to my guys, look, we're all going to be working remotely from now on, we won't have a London office presence, I would lose valued employees. So clearly that can't happen. I think again, it depends how the employing organisation addresses those situations. There will be difficulties. You can't get to a stage where people feel put upon. They need to feel that their safety and their well-being is being taken care of. And I think if an organisation can implement social distancing policies that give people that confidence, then and generally engagement should be positive. I mean, it will be one element of a whole series of elements around the return to work. Some of the things we've talked about, but again, done well, it's a positive factor. It's a hygiene factor. It will be expected. I think done badly, or if individuals feel that their health and well-being isn't being taken care of in the way that the company should do, then it could have a severe impact negatively. So, as I say, it's a hygiene factor. It should be expected, just as all the other hygiene factors, clean, nice, fresh, aired offices should be. So I guess time will tell. Some organisations will get that right. Other organisations may struggle a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a big change for I think the sort of management and leadership community to get our heads around. I'm going to take us into our fourth theme of the hour now, if I may, and that's the hugely challenging task of restructuring and restructuring sensitively, which of course so many businesses are now having to sort of face up to. I wonder, Owen, whether you can share some of your thoughts on how to make redundancies sensitively, and also perhaps a bit around what the notice requirements might look like in this new world.
Sure. So I guess I'll deal with the last question first. So notice requirements won't change. HR law is still HR law and it's still applicable. So organisations considering any form of structural change that results in redundancies will have to go through the approved process. And I guess that's something that some organisations do well, others less well. The ones that do it less well end up having sort of tribunal claims. But I guess from the perspective that we come at it, it's always difficult. Letting people go is one of the most challenging aspects that any manager has to undertake as part of their role. I've done it in the past. I've been on the receiving end of that discussion, and it is difficult. And I think the important thing for any organisation is to bring a degree of humanity to it. You're working with individuals and colleagues who you may have worked with and who may have been part of a team for a number of years. And I feel very strongly about this, that you need to treat them with a degree of respect and dignity that they deserve. That doesn't always mean you can rush to provide outplacement services, for example. I work with many organisations that for various reasons don't provide outplacement, but they provide things internally. So they try and support individuals as much as possible if they are ultimately let go. I guess before we get to that stage, a lot of the focus around letting people go is around transparency. So what people don't want is decisions made behind closed doors. So they need to feel part of the process. And again, if you can be transparent with that decision-making activity, people understand the reasons behind it. That's important, because if they understand the reasons behind it, they can accept it. If they don't understand the reasons behind it, or they've not been effectively consulted as part of the consultation process, that's when you tend to sort of have a bigger degree of disruption and a longer impact in terms of recovery for the business than if you do consult properly. So there's a number of stages. They're very well laid out. Look on CIPD websites, HR websites. There's very clear steps around organisations and how they should do that. What I would say is make sure that the line managers are effectively trained in having the conversations. It's not always easy. Don't offer sort of false optimism. Sometimes it's very easy for an individual manager to say, look, I'm sure this won't happen. I don't think it'll affect you. They can absolve themselves of the decision. Yeah, it's not me. It's the individuals further up the chain of command. Those are unhelpful comments. You have to address this full on. It is difficult. You have to deal with it sensitively. You have to make sure that people are given time and space to reflect and to offer up any opportunities. That's the whole reason behind the consultation process. But ultimately, if it does come to the point at which individuals need to leave, then again, do it sensitively. Make sure that you provide support to them as far as possible. Look to try and retain good links with people. I think a lot of organisations let people go and suffer tremendously as a result of it. We're all familiar with sites like Glassdoor. It's very easy to build it's very difficult to build a good reputation. It's very easy to lose it. So I think it's incumbent on any organisation or any line manager letting people go to try and do their best by them. It's difficult if you have an individual that's worked for an organisation for 10 or 15 years, thoroughly enjoyed their role, and then for want of an improved process in the last month or so, they leave that employer with a very negative view of how they were treated at the end. People generally are very well ensconced with their employers. They're proud to work for certain organisations. I know I am. And I think if you put that in jeopardy towards the end of any employment period, you do so at your risk. So making sure that you follow the legal guidelines, do it sensitively, make sure people are kept informed, make sure that managers are well trained, and make sure that people are supported if possible. Then you should get to a stage where you can mitigate any negative repercussions.
What wise words there? Wise words. You've mentioned, I think, twice in the programme, this notion of outplacement services. Now, I suspect that for those in larger organisations, that may be more familiar terminology to those in sort of micro businesses. Can you tell us a bit more about the idea of outplacement and what it involves?
Sure. So outplacement as a concept first evolved after World War II. So all the soldiers coming back from foreign fields were demobbed, and they needed support in terms of reintegrating themselves into the workplace. So they were given some very basic instruction around, moving back into employment. That concept became part and parcel of executive compensation packages, probably in the 60s and 70s. Took off in the 70s and the 80s. And at that point, it was very much restricted to senior individuals. So it was helping individuals who were let go from their employer, were made redundant, to find their way in the world. So in some cases that was, look, I've lost my job, I need another job, I need to draft a new CV, I need to practice my interview skills, I need to understand how the job market has changed. In some other cases it was I want to start my own business. In some cases it was I want to have some form of portfolio career. So a range of different activities to help people into the next stage of their career. Over the last 20 years it's been increasingly democratized. So our business works with organizations from FTSE 100 companies through to relatively small SMEs, 15, 20 people, and provide services from £500 from support to, in the 20s of thousands of pounds for very senior CEOs, board directors. So it is something that gives people a safety net, a blanket. They've got someone on their side. They work with a career coach to help them look at the job market and determine the right move for them as they look to develop their career. So if someone's never started a business before, they can work with a career coach that's very comfortable in that environment and helps individuals start their businesses. They can look at franchises. They can look at moving into sort of MBOs or MBIs at the higher level. A lot of the work is much more prosaic. It is around, I've lost my job as a sales manager. Excuse me. I need to find my my next job as a sales manager. So how do I do that? What am I looking for? How do I navigate the current jobs market? Which employers are looking? Do I have access to the relevant information and databases? Is my CV appropriate? Let's practice the interview skills. Let's make sure my social media profile is appropriate. So it's a very wide-ranging, broad church.
But it sounds like a really useful tool, though, for both employers and employees alike that may be exiting in managing, those difficult transition moments in one's life.
It softens the blow, and for a relatively modest investment, it can get people thinking forward rather than fretting about what may have been in their previous role.
Thank you. Now, on a much more practical level, a quick question for Lance, and that is, if you're trying to get your head round whether you can start the redundancy process while staff are on furlough, what's the current thinking there, Lance? And does furlough time contribute to a paid notice period?
So then some of that is a bit up in the air. So you can start a consultation process. I think I alluded to it. Any consultation process needs to follow the law, and the law says that if you are doing a consultation on redundancy, that the idea is to avoid the redundancy. So the consultation is in place to avoid the redundancy where possible. So any business that is contemplating making any redundancies needs to consider all the other options as well, not just the fact that they can't employing people. So you could consider things like reducing pay, which some businesses will have done already. You can consider reducing some roles to part-time, which will reduce the pay as well if revenue is an issue. You can consider putting people on unpaid leave, sabbaticals, for example. And at the moment, it's not absolutely clear, but the thinking is that if there is a job retention scheme in place, then you should use that rather than making people redundant. If you are going to make people redundant at the end of a consultation period, you need to understand that they may well challenge the reasons why you haven't used the job retention scheme, and a tribunal may find in their favour. Now, in terms of the question on notice, again, that's something that's absolute, and the advice we're giving clients at the moment is, if you do put people on notice during furlough, as far as we know, it's allowed, but the Inland Revenue, the HMRC, may well come back at a later date and say, well, actually, the idea of job retention scheme was to keep jobs, so the notice you're going to have to pay, and they shouldn't be on furlough, so you can't claim that furlough period. But we just don't know yet.
Sounds like a key question that West London Business, CIPD, and others really need to be, twisting the arm of HMRC and the Treasury to give clarity on, because that's ambiguity that I don't think any business owner or manager is going to want resting on their shoulders. Now, the time always flies by at Talk and 10, and we are getting close to the top of the hour. But in the last few minutes we've got, I'd like to sort of cast forward for us just to think briefly around how we prepare our workforce for the long term. We've obviously witnessing a huge change in the shape of our economy and the way we work. I wonder how you both anticipate this will change the demands on the workforce and also the demands on those leading HR and people functions. Owen, what are your thoughts on the future landscape?
I think there'll be a number of different changes. I can't see business getting back to normal in the way that it once was. I think, as we've already spoken about, people are less keen on moving back into a sort of a 5-day a week commute into an office in a big city. So I suspect there will be an ongoing level of individuals working from home. I think there will be a reduction in office space in some of the big cities. I think some of the organisations that were letting these huge office spaces will find that many of their tenants will look to move some of their workforce back out into smaller offices or into the regions, or indeed allow people to work from home. So there'll be an impact there. I think technology, as we've already touched upon, has really benefited from this situation. So the connectivity that we all see in terms of video activity, some of the social media platforms, there's a lot of real benefits there that accrue to individuals that can get their heads around that type of communication style and indeed use it effectively. So I think we'll see a lot of activity in that space. Virtual skills will become important. So communication skills, I think, are increasingly in demand. The ability to manage change, the ability to be a resilient employer and to be a resilient employee. I think all of those types of activities will come to the fore and will be in demand from future organisations. We'll see less travel. I don't think people will want to jump on the commuter trains in the way they once were. So I think there's a lot of change. I think a lot of it's yet to be determined in terms of how it will pan out. But I think it makes for a very interesting few months, if I can say that, amidst the difficulties that clearly individuals and organisations are having.
I've learned a new bit of jargon today, virtual communication skills, but I'm sure that's going to be talked about a lot more moving forward, as you say. Lance, what are your reflections on what the future might look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of it will depend on what you're in. So there will be just let's say food manufacturing, for example, where they're not going to be able to do too much different other than add some technology in, as your office-based worker, of course. I think there's going to be quite a few more requests. We've heard it from Owen already for more flexible working from home, and enabling to do that. And other businesses have already understood that they can do that. So why wouldn't that continue? I think we have to look forward and understand. Nobody knows when the upturn will come. We all think it probably will be a little while. But when it does come, if it's going to come quickly, it needs to be ready for that as well. And if you are thinking about making staff redundant, how are you then going to bring new staff back in? Well, you have done it worth your reputation in the work to find staff. So there's lots of things for different organisations to consider, and I think that it all depends, quite frankly, on how long the downturn will be, and when the upturn will come. Actually, that comes.
We touched upon earlier that the role, Owen, of it, through, I suppose, sort of personal development plan type processes of reflecting with one's staff on their future skills needs, and I think it's widely known that we don't have a great reputation in this country of investing very much per head in staff as employers on training and skills development. And yet, of course, we're now in this place where change is accelerating. to what extent do you think there's a reality that employees have got to take ownership of their reskilling and upskilling versus the employer? What's your sense, Lance? Oh, sorry, Owen. Sorry.
I mean, it's interesting. I think when you look at how organisations have tended to develop their employees over the last 40, 50 years, in the 70s and 80s, it was very paternalistic. We will train you to do the job that we want you to do. I think that then you moved into the sort of the 90s and the early part of the 2000s, and the pendulum swung the other way. So it was very much around, okay, you're on your own, you develop yourself. We're going to pick and choose from the talent pool available. I think now the pendulum swung back a little bit, and there's a realization probably for the last 5-6 years that we're all in this together. Talent is a rare commodity. People are a rare commodity. And certainly individuals who are motivated and display the skills that all organizations want, need to be developed. They need to feel motivated, and they need to feel that their employer believes in them and buys into them. And of course, the way that you can do that is to improve their capabilities and their skills, so to train them. Andrew, you're absolutely right. I think L&D budgets tend to be one of the first budgets that go when organizations are looking to conserve cash. And actually that's counterproductive in the long term. So, individuals who are sitting at home potentially who could be being developed, even if it's some straightforward online courses, some free courses, some signposting activity. My daughter talked to me recently about a website called Coursera. It seems to offer a whole free range of support. So letting people get to a stage where they can take ownership of their future career development is important, and it doesn't have to be expensive. I think those organizations that look to sort of cheerlead the careers of their employees will benefit from more motivated, more engaged employees when things do start to return to normal. So, I would take advantage of the free opportunities that are available.
As you say, so much that's available for free now. But actually, I've been hugely struck by LinkedIn Learning, where I think for £23 a month or thereabouts, you get access to 23,000 plus courses. You'd hope most firms could be making that sort of investment, or even splitting the cost with their staff.
Absolutely right.
I'm going to turn back to Pim just for sort of perhaps a final question of the day from our viewers. Pim.
So another question that's come in from viewers is, with the government talking about the prospect of local and regional lockdowns, how can a business best prepare for this? For example, if a head office is in Manchester and locked down, but a regional office is in London and fully functional.
Should we go to Lance first of all on that question? The sort of this just changing world where different parts of the UK are unlocking at different times, and then perhaps invite Owen's reflections too there.
Yeah, thank you. I think that if there is going to be a local lockdown, then the business just has to take that into account, follow the government lines, and understand what the government is saying about what can be done. So it might be difficult for a business if they've got an office, let's say Manchester and London. If the London one can continue and the Manchester one can't continue in the way that they want it to, then it's just a case of following the guidelines, but making sure, again, you communicate with your staff, you use the government schemes that are available. We've talked a lot about what happens when people are furloughed. So if they have to be furloughed again, what do you do with those people to keep them engaged, ready for when they do come back? Because furlough has to last at least 3 weeks. You can have training. We talked about training and upskilling. There's a lot of e-learning things out there that people can do as well. In this case, maybe make a contingency plan in place to say, this is what we're going to do. Tell your staff beforehand, and then implement it when it comes.
So get ready for a likely scenario of local lockdowns in different places. Owen, any reflections you'd like to add there?
I guess just two quick points. So we talked about resilience today from an employee perspective. I think you can also talk about resilience from an organizational perspective. So make sure your business or your organization is resilient against any future challenges. Now, one way we can do that is to look at the lessons that we learned when we first went into lockdown. So some organizations did it very well, others less so, others had a real challenge. So I think the example that's been given, a Manchester office and a London office, if Manchester is locked down, for example, or if London is locked down, I think we need to look at what the positive aspects that came out of it when we went into lockdown in March, and what we learned from that transition process. So it's likely that to happen. So I think we need to make contingency plans now for that eventuality. So there are things that we can learn. There are mistakes that we need to try and avoid. So I think, again, if someone is making sure that there's an accountability within an organisation to plan for that future event, then that's a good first step.
Thank you. Goodness, we've covered an awful lot of ground in just an hour, but our time is unfortunately up. Thank you, as always, to my production team, Pim and Janelle at West London Business, Joel, who beavers away in the background as our AV technician at Revolution Audio, but particularly a thank you to my guests today, Lance Hobbs, Director at HR Department, Ealing and Park Royal, and Owen Morgan, UK Managing Director at Into. As always, continue to share your thoughts with us and visit coronavirus.westlondon.com for the latest information and support. As I always say, to speak to a human being about your concerns, call 020 8607 2500. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please click on the button below the video stream to stay informed and show your support for our work. Diarise next Thursday, the 4th of May at 10 a.m. For our next talk at 10, which will be an extended edition for the big debate, West London after the virus. This webinar is going to be free to all registrants, and we will be joined by a special guest, West London concert pianist Harriet Stubbs, who will be sharing how she's been adapting to COVID-19, as well as playing live for us. Until then, we wish you, your friends, family and colleagues good health, and please maintain social distancing wherever possible to stay safe.